Welcome to our group presentation. I'm Caitlin, and today myself, Marissa, Lyndon, Ashley, and Sarah are going to be discussing poverty for sole parents. Poverty. So what is it? According to World Vision Australia, poverty is a severe lack of certain possession which significantly reduce the quality of a person's life. Or put more simply, the state of being extremely poor. People that live in poverty struggle to meet their basic human needs. This includes having limited access to food, clothing, healthcare, education, shelter, and safety, as well as having a lack of social, economical, political, or material income and resources. A person is then considered poor if they are unable to meet these basic needs.
In 80% of single-parent households, the mother is the primary caregiver. As we are a group made up entirely of young women, we were eager to further research and develop our understanding of this population group. We not only wanted to look at the issue as a whole, but also better our understanding of the underlying causes and factors which contribute to their lived experience. For some of us, it is an issue near to our hearts as we've experienced poverty related to this topic firsthand. For others, it is an issue which has affected someone close to us. In an attempt to better understand why single-parent households experience such a high rate of poverty, we looked at quantitative research, primarily pulling data from ACOS's Poverty in Australia report. We also looked at the lived experience of this population group and how it has impacted their families. We examined government policy and legislation, causing factors as well as applicable theories of poverty. To begin our presentation, I'm going to attempt to illustrate the magnitude of poverty for sole parent households in Australia and its relation to child poverty. To do this, I'll present statistics and quantitative information in order to present a snapshot of this issue, which my team members will then expand on. According to the Australian Council of Social Services, also known as ACOS, in Australia, it is estimated that over 3 million people are living below the poverty line, 739,000 of which are children. Within this figure, single-parent households are disproportionately represented, experiencing poverty at a far higher rate in this country, with just under 1/3 of all people in sole-parent families living in poverty. As median incomes, housing costs and income support have fluctuated over the years, so too has the poverty rate for single-parent households. However, in recent years, the number of these households experiencing poverty has been on the rise. The Australian Bureau of Statistics' 2016 census counted over 900,000 lone parent households. Of these households, it is estimated that 1/3 are living below the poverty line in Australia. The poverty line is a method of measuring income poverty. It is the estimated amount of money believed to be necessary for a person to meet minimum living conditions. For a single parent with 2 children, the poverty line is considered $692.73 per week before housing costs. According to ACOS, in Australia, over 730,000 children are living in poverty. That's 17.4% of all Australian children under the age of 15. Children from single-parent households are far more likely to experience poverty. In fact, they are 3 times as likely to live below the poverty line when compared to a child from a coupled parent family. 40% of all children experiencing poverty and deprivation come from single-parent households, despite single-parent households only making up 15.8% of Australia's family group demographic. The Salvation Army's 2017 Economic and Social Impact Survey reported that 64% of income goes towards housing, and after paying those associated costs, single parents were left with only $14.35 per day to live on, which is far below the poverty line. In terms of meeting their children's needs, single parents noted that they were unable to afford necessities related to social connection, education, basic nutrition, and medical care. An internet connection, school uniforms, books, dental care, and leisurely activities are luxuries that many of these families simply cannot afford. For a child, the implications of living in poverty are further reaching than their daily lived experience. A research report titled Low Income and Poverty Dynamics, Implications for Child Outcomes noted that there is a significant association between poverty and a child's developmental outcomes. A child's living situation can be linked to their future cognitive, social, emotional, and health outcomes. Poverty within single-parent households is an incredibly widespread issue, impacting a large chunk of Australia's population. To better understand why so many single-parent households are living in poverty, we must look beyond statistics, income, and the poverty line. My fellow team members will now expand on the topic, looking at contributing factors as well as how it has affected this population group.
The article Trapped in Poverty, written by Ruth Weston, highlighted some of the impacts poverty can have on single mothers, having a strong focus on what the mother and child now miss out on due to the loss of the father's financial support. It briefly details some positive and negative impacts poverty can have on this demographic. It is widely known that sole parent pensions, also known as Social Security or parenting payments, have dramatically improved since the late 1900s, also since the study named in the article was first conducted in 1987. Child support payments and earned income are now subject to separate testing, income-free area is now indexed, and sole parents on a pension who gain full-time employment may keep their fringe benefits for 6 months. Moreover, there are additional supports the government offers to assist sole parents into re-entering the workforce, such as the childcare subsidy for daycare services and an additional return-to-work payment made to further reduce the childminding expenditure. Another positive impact, as described further in the article, and not something commonly spoken about, is the positive feeling a mother can get from gaining full-time employment after a separation, helping to build self-esteem and instill a sense of accomplishment and pride, aiding in alleviating some of the poverty struggles. One single mother within the article stated, "I was lucky in that I got a good job when I separated. I couldn't possibly manage on only the supporting parents' benefit, and I couldn't stay home depressed. You need a job for therapy too. It's worth paying for creche and childminding because a job gives you self-esteem. This is very important because after a divorce you feel a failure. If I'd stayed home and received the benefit, I think I wouldn't have coped as well with my children." On the other hand, some of the negative impacts listed within the article are things such as poverty traps, which are situations in which an increase in someone's income is offset by a consequent loss of government benefits, leaving them no better off. Some mothers are not able to work their way out of poverty while only employed part-time, with the additional earnings reducing government benefits and instead going towards childcare fees and transport costs to and from work. Stigmatisation can cause great impact on a sole parent, adding to the already high levels of guilt, shame, and disappointment one may feel in themselves by victim blaming. It can arouse a community mentality that single mothers should be working to support their children, so much so that they put themselves into poverty. They may have more children so as to continue to gain government benefits, and thus they are unfit to provide any child with an upbringing they deserve, leading to a strong feeling of failure and hindering their capacity to break away from poverty. If they all believe I can't do it, then maybe they're right. This can further lead to significant mental health concerns, such as post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, anxiety, and suicide ideations. A significant hindering impact on the children living with sole parents through associated experiences of poverty may contribute or even lead to increased risk of living within poverty all the way through to adulthood. Being the parent that may have chosen to stay home and raise the children while their partner worked, there can be a lack of education and/or qualification for the sole parents who have recently separated, making it harder for them to re-enter the workforce and gain employment. If the sole parent is successful in gaining employment, there is potentially the feeling of loss for the time that they now no longer have with their children that they once did. The world in which we live now greatly impacts sole parents, in forcing them to work or to continue to live in poverty. While working carries no guarantee it will alleviate any of the stress, as mentioned earlier, with the increase in income there is the loss of government benefits and support, the safety net that some sole parents can come to rely on in times of need. All of this adds to having to go without additional things. These can be things such as new clothing, regular nutritious meals every day, and/or extracurricular activities. The study Life or New Start, a reality for low-income single mothers, written by Hayley Jane McKenzie, Claire McHugh, and Fiona H. McKay, explores the lived experience of low-income single mothers and their children in a qualitative approach, with in-depth interviews being conducted with 23 low-income single mothers to complete this study and further describe the impacts of poverty for this demographic. During this study, it was discovered that, for these women experiencing poverty, there is constant financial uncertainty, stress and anxiety experienced by both the parent and the child. These women describe themselves as living in constant fear. The findings and descriptions used by these women as their lived experiences are things such as having to prioritise money based on what is essential, negotiable, and forfeited. Items considered essential and paid first are housing and utility bills. Food is identified as being negotiable due to the financial pressures of living within poverty. Single mothers are forced to make a choice between paying rent or having food to eat, and then having to further base their food purchases on price rather than nutritional content, despite their knowledge and understanding of healthy eating practices, with one mother saying she was living off instant noodles and toasted sandwiches. Other mothers within the study have stated they sometimes have gone days without eating, attempting to extend and ration the amount of food for their children. Their children go to school without food for recess and lunch, and the household is often left hungry and malnourished. Costs relating to healthcare and social activities are abandoned completely, forfeited for the other base necessities required for survival. Consequently, great concern was expressed from the women pertaining to meeting their children's education costs in relation to uniforms, shoes, etc. This, again, all impacts the mothers to such an extent that they are then experiencing depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder. The Outside Systems Control My Life, Single Mother Stories of Welfare to Work, published by Good Shepherd Australia New Zealand, summarises the story of 26 mothers contained within the study, who receive income support and feel outside systems control their lives. These case studies highlight the impact living in poverty can have on sole parents. The emotional impact of poverty and the struggles of single parenting leave some single mothers feeling overwhelmed with their everyday life. The stress of barely being able to cover expenses such as bills, food, and rent is intense. One participant in the study explained she felt almost financially crippled. The Welfare to Work program has been difficult for many single parents, and even those interviewed who were employed still reported to be struggling financially. Often women reported having to go without. One woman reported not being able to afford much needed dental work or even be able to fix her car. There is evidence that show it to be a great financial instability and uncertainty, as some single parents face the fear of being cut off from their Centrelink payments. The physical health impacts of poverty that are highlighted here commonly found that single mothers experience poor physical health. Furthermore, the psychological impacts can be seen, as some of these single parents face experiences of shame and feelings of failure after not being able to fully provide for themselves and their children. After examining the qualitative research regarding the lived experiences and impacts of poverty on sole parents, it is evident that, ultimately, a sole parent in poverty is seemingly trapped in a vicious cycle unlikely to be broken in the current socio-economic climate.
There are a number of different government policies and legislations that directly influence the experiences of poverty that many sole parents face in Australia today. Many welfare support policies dictate what income support payment options are available for sole parents, how easily accessible these payments are, and even outline certain criteria that sole parents must meet in order to be deemed eligible for income support. In 2005, the sole parent poverty rate was around 19%. This then jumped to 23.9% in 2007 and can partly be explained by the July 2006 Welfare to Work reforms. Welfare to work is a form of welfare conditionality that states that there are responsibilities that come with the right to welfare. These reforms mean that the individuals part of the program must meet mutual obligation requirements, such as paid employment, looking for jobs, approved study and or work for the dole scheme, and approved volunteering. Individuals who fail to comply with these may face suspensions of their payments unless they have an exemption already in place. Some critiques of this policy include the failure to recognise that sole parents are already participating in the unpaid work, which is the care of their children, that is necessary. Lack of consideration for the barriers that sole parents may face in finding employment, and the inability for the policy to meet its desired goals, such as improving workplace participation, self-reliance, and improving financial security. Research that was conducted by Good Shepherd interviewing 26 single mothers about their experience on welfare to work found that many actually believed that the program was unhelpful, created unhelpful barriers that held them back from achieving their goals, and many participants experienced having their payments cut due to non-compliance or miscommunication, and it also created stress and anxiety due to the fear of payments being cut. During 2006, the Howard government also started to move sole parents from the parenting payment onto the New Start allowance. This was much lower, and they started moving them onto the New Start allowance once their youngest child turned 8. This issue increased in 2013 when a further transfer of 80,000 sole parents were moved onto the New Start allowance by the Gillard government. This influenced an increase in the rate of poverty among unemployed sole parents, from 35% in 2013 to 59% in 2015. Child poverty was also influenced by this change in policy, as it rose from 16.5% in 2013 to 2014 to 17.2% in 2015 to 2016. Advocacy group The Parenthood reported that sole parents moved onto the New Start allowance from parent payment single were between $60 to $160 worse off than they were previously. The Parenthood also conducted a survey of 550 sole parents who were moved onto New Start and found that more than half of the participants have struggled to meet their rental costs after being moved from parent payments to New Start allowance. And around 88% reported that they struggled to cover the cost of groceries for their families each week. Around 67% of participants reported that their child has suffered social or emotional distress, and 73% of participants said that their own mental health has declined. The research mentioned earlier by Good Shepherd also reported that many single mothers could not afford basic needs, essential for both themselves and their families. Many reported not being able to afford childcare, medical and dental expenses, transportation, and at times food. So, from this research and these statistics, we can conclude that the transfer of 80,000 sole parents that were moved onto the New Start allowance, has negatively impacted many sole parents across the country and increased the rates of poverty in unemployed sole parents heavily. In addition to this, since July of 2018, 73,000 parents have been moved onto the Parents Next program, with around 3/4 of them being single mothers. Approximately 96% of the participants in the Parents Next program are female. And Parents Next is a scheme that began in 2016 as a pilot program, but is now Australia-wide and has the aim of helping parents with children under 6 to plan and prepare for the future of employment or study. Jenny Davidson from the Council of Single Mothers and Their Children, Victoria, stated that the program did not do what it was designed to do, and even claimed that the program actually makes parents' lives harder. However, the government insists that the program is doing well and meeting desired goals. Parents Next is a program that, like Welfare to Work, is a part of the welfare compliance regime, meaning that if compulsory activities such as appointments, short courses, part-time work, and other training activities are not done, that this may result in payments being suspended. The lack of consideration for human rights has been a major criticism of this program, with Rosalind Croucher, the President of Australian Human Rights Commission, arguing that it is a breach of international human rights laws that state that all people are entitled to a minimum essential level of social security. Similarly, non-profit provider Brotherhood of St. Lawrence stated that the welfare compliance regime is having devastating impacts, financial, physical, and psychological, on both parents and their young children. With approximately 71.5% of parenting payments recipients being single parents, this has come under a lot of criticism. The Human Rights Commission has released many recommendations to ensure that no rights are breached if the government wish to continue this further, stating that a recommendation being that the targeted compliance framework be removed from Parents Next so that participants cannot be subjected to suspension, reduction, or cancellation of their parenting payments for non-compliance with program requirements. And secondly, that participation in Parents Next should be on a voluntary opt-in basis rather than a mandatory basis. In summary, the many government policies surrounding welfare support have significant impacts on sole parents in Australia. Although the current welfare support policies do assist sole parents in some ways, an improvement in these policies, and therefore an improvement in the welfare support available, would help greatly to alleviate the severity of poverty that many sole parents face and improve their well-being.
For sole parents, particularly those that are females, there are many key factors that cause poverty. Whilst over time there has been a large improvement for women within society, there is considerably more sole parent women than there are men. 104,000 females compared to 34,000 male sole parent families. Generally, a woman's wage is lower than a male's. This is one key cause to poverty among women. With women on a lower wage and having to provide for themselves and their children, it becomes very challenging to be able to provide general necessities such as food, clothing, and adequate housing. The nature of work that women are more inclined to do is more likely to be part-time or casual. Even for those single parents that are employed or are able to gain employment, single parents have lower employment rates as it becomes challenging as there are limited family-friendly options, and they also have to consider their children and whether or not they are in need of care and what will be a larger financial benefit, putting them into care or to be a stay-at-home parent with government benefits if family and friends are unable to give support. With long daycare costing between $70 to $180 per day and out-of-school hours care ranging between $15 and $45 per session, parents are having to work only to be paying childcare fees, leaving a low to no percentage of their wage to be able to afford their other needs. Parents also have to put into consideration the costs of their children's education on top of childcare fees. Not only the children's education, but some may need to consider the cost of their own education. Parents completing their own further education helps allow them to gain employment that may help their single-parent family out of poverty. Although, through their time of study, their families are likely to struggle financially and be classed as having low socioeconomic status and living in poverty. As mentioned earlier, living in poverty makes it challenging to supply adequate housing for the family. House prices rise a lot faster than what wages do, making it very challenging for families to own their own home as they are becoming less affordable. With this influences many individuals and their families to rent rather than to buy a home, even though rent prices are high and there is a lack of access to affordable housing, especially that suitable to a family that may have multiple children. For those parents not able to gain employment or are studying, are eligible for $776.10 per fortnight, with Centrelink payments for sole parents. This includes pension support. The poverty line within Australia is classified as $886 per fortnight for a single adult living alone. Sole parents that rely on Centrelink benefits are living with $109.09 less than what is classed as the poverty line for a single person with no children. The 2018 Poverty in Australia report explores how location can impact your chance of living in poverty. The report states that poverty is higher among people that live outside capital cities, as is shown here through this graph. The next graph is comparing different poverty rates between the different Australian states and territories. People living in South Australia and Western Australia are at higher risk of poverty, whilst those living in the Australian Capital Territory and Northern Territory face lower risks of poverty. The Australian Bureau of Statistics 2017 media release about single parents state that the large majority of 83% of one-parent families with children or dependent students were families with single mothers. 56% of single-parent mothers had employment, compared to 72% of single-parent fathers. Employment of sole parents generally increases with the age of the youngest child. 40% of employment for families with youngest dependent 5 or under, to 72% employment with youngest dependent 15. These discussed issues are all key factors that influence poverty within sole parents in Australia.
Structural theory is the most relevant to the poverty of sole parents, as there are many contributing factors as to the reason of why they fall into poverty. These include one-parent income. The median income for a single-parent family in 2016 was $974 per week, population experts tell us, compared to the $1,734 for all households. So that is roughly around half of what a two-parent family income would be. By the time rent, education, childcare cost, weekly households including groceries, petrol, and bills, and finally the additional costs such as medication, doctor visits, school excursions, uniforms, and birthday parties, this leaves very little to none for savings or other necessities. This now brings me to the cost of housing. The average price of rent in Melbourne is $410 per week for an apartment and $420 per week for a house, and Home Sales tells us the Bendigo median price of rent is $365 for a house per week. However, while many rural and remote areas are more affordable housing, this advantage is lost when employment opportunities, schooling, health, and transport services are poor. As mentioned, employment is difficult for single parents, especially in the case of a newborn to toddler-aged child. As a new parent, they're not ready to leave their child or children at such a young age to go back to work, or they've had a traumatic birth preventing them to go back to work after 18 weeks postpartum. Childcare is another factor, paying a huge $70 to $185 per day care for kids. However, this rate can change depending on a single parent income assessment. Unfortunately, a working parent can become worse off than a non-working parent, as the working parent has to pay more fees with less government assistance. It can then equate to what the extras they may have earned has just gone to fees. Hence the reason why a sole parent may be at a disadvantage either way. For example, let's say a single parent worked 3 days a week, and each shift they work, they put their child into childcare for $185. That is $555 a week. And now let's say this single parent has 2 kids. That is $1,100 a week. As mentioned previously, the median income per week for a single parent was $974. The average price of rent is $365. Now let's add the weekly groceries. That could be anywhere from $70 to $110. Now add 2 days childcare, $370. Now we'll add petrol. That could be from $30 to $50 for that week. Bills might be looking at $150. And basic necessities, $50. All this combined adds up to $1,045. Now we're going to move on to individual theories. Individual theories isn't considered a relevant theory that places sole parents into poverty. Being a sole parent has large amounts of negative stigma surrounding them. There are individuals and groups placing this stigma onto people who are defined as heroes and have the greatest determination. This negative stigma includes that the behaviour and choices ultimately put them into this position, that their individual chose to be single and put themselves into sole parent predicament, that they have no intention of working but choose to live off Centrelink, that the child's well-being to be raised in a two-parent family and that their sons especially have a father figure to look up to. Social media, and finally, socio-economic status, being judged on their postal address. As shown, this negative stigma would have mental impact to a sole parent whose intentions are for the greater good of the child and their well-being. We are finally moving on to the multi-dimensional theory. Multi-dimensional theory is a combination of individual, agency, and structural factors. Therefore, this theory is a relevant competing theory as it can contribute to a person and/or group's experience of poverty. Mr. states, poverty is best understood as a function of social, economic, and political structure and processes which create a perpetuate and unequal distribution of resources both within a global context and between societies. Individuals and groups who experience poverty do so as active agents who will react in different ways and forge their own lives with structural constraints facing them. Lista, 2004. So as previously mentioned, the welfare system, a high cost of childcare, education and housing on a one-parent income is a single factor. Yet the individual theory, who has a negative stigma, are all aspects in the multi-dimensional theory. However, multi-dimensional theory also looks into Lista's several dimensions to explaining and understanding the causes and impacts of poverty. The ones most relevant to sole parents include structural inequalities, the class, socio-economic status, income, wealth, and material deprivation. Another, group individual, so the different experience and responses to human agency. And lastly, geographic, location and living environment, urban, rural, global. This one can contribute to the high cost of housing, meaning that sole parent may live in an unworthy suburb or may move from the city to rural to find affordable housing. Thank you.
Hundreds of thousands of children live below the breadline. Welfare agencies are urging the government to adopt a bipartisan approach to make a difference. Emily Bill's 3 daughters are healthy, happy, and oblivious to the fact they're living below the poverty line. The 21-year-old mum and her partner both have jobs but live with his parents because they can't make ends meet.
It makes me feel very exhausted and angry and upset. Like, I can't afford stuff that other people can afford.
25-year-old single mother Jessica Russell can't work because she can't afford childcare.
On a bad week, I struggle to even feed myself. I rather feed my kids before I feed myself.
They are not choices that any Australian should be forced to make. However, 3 million of our community look at these choices all the time.
The Australian Council of Social Service found 731,000 children live in poverty. That's 17% of the nation's young people.
The story of children in this report should alarm us all.
The report found children from single-parent families are most at risk. They're 3 times more likely to live in poverty than those with 2 parents. Currently, 40% of children with a sole parent are living below the poverty line.
We have absolutely cut family payments in a way that is making children live in poverty now. This has to stop.
It's been 30 years since Bob Hawke tried to make child poverty history.
By 1990, no Australian child will be living in poverty.
Welfare agencies want today's politicians to try again.
The entire system really needs review, but it needs review bipartisanly across government.
I think the best way to deal with child poverty is to have a strong economy, because a lot of these kids are growing up in households where one or more parents and maybe even grandparents has not had a job.
Emily Bills and Jessica Russell both plan to study next year.
I don't want to miss out on anything, but it's what I have to do so I can survive.
And what they both want to do for a brighter future. Mazoe Ford, ABC News. Within this media report, sole parent Jessica expresses how she needs to be a stay-at-home mother to her young child as she is unable to afford childcare. She also states that sometimes she cannot even afford food for herself because feeding her children is more important.
With 17% of the nation's young people living in poverty and children from single-parent families being 3 times more likely to live in poverty, means the poverty cycle is more likely to continue. Throughout this presentation, we have looked into detail present data to demonstrate the extent and nature experienced by sole parents. We have discussed the impact sole parents face through their experiences. We have looked at the influence of government policies and legislations, and discussed the cause and factors contributing to poverty and competing theories. This concludes our presentation. Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoyed.